So, good afternoon, everybody. Today, we are going to learn about pharmacology of heart failure. And this lecture is actually divided into two parts. In this first class, we will try to understand the physiology of cardiac performance. What are the factors which influences the cardiac performances? And then we will understand what actually heart failure is, and what is the basic pathophysiology of heart failure. And once we have understood the basic pathophysiology of heart failure, we can easily elaborate or understand the drugs targeting the pathophysiological aspects of heart failure. So, if I ask you what is the basic duty of the heart, or what is the basic function of the heart? Yes? Yes. Basic function of the heart, or the basic duty of the heart, is pumping of the blood. And why it needs to pump up the blood? Yeah, to provide the body with enough cardiac output so that the metabolic demands or metabolic needs of the peripheral tissues can be met up with. So, the basic duty of the heart is to provide enough cardiac output to meet up the demand of the peripheral tissues. Now, can you correlate this basic duty of the heart with what actually heart failure is? In heart failure, heart fails to perform this basic duty. And what is the basic duty of the heart? Yeah, to pump up the blood to ultimately provide the enough cardiac output to the peripheral tissues to meet up the metabolic demand of the body. Now, as I have told you, in heart failure, heart fails as a pump. So heart failure can basically be called as failure of the heart to do normal function. Now, let us understand it in a easier way, though it cannot include all the things of the heart failure, but it can easily uh, uh, helps you to understand what actually heart failure is. Now, in the heart failure, heart is being filled up in most of the cases. There might be some exceptions that we will discuss. In most of the cases, the heart is being filled up properly. Okay, but in spite of the proper filling, the heart is unable to maintain enough cardiac output. So, heart failure can further be said that in spite of the presence of normal or above normal filling pressure, heart is unable to maintain enough cardiac output. Now, heart failure broadly can be of two types. There might be systolic dysfunction, or there might be diastolic dysfunction. In the diastolic dysfunction, there might not be proper filling itself. But in systolic dysfunction, in spite of the proper filling, heart is not being able to pump up the blood. So, heart failure, rather than a disease, we should call it as a clinical pathological syndrome, there is always one underlying cause that you should look after while treating a patient of heart failure. Heart failure actually develops in consequence to certain underlying disease that the patient might have already. It might be ischemic heart disease, it might be valvular disease, it might be cardiomyopathy. So these disease of the heart can ultimately lead to either systolic dysfunction or the diastolic dysfunction. So in the systolic dysfunction, there will be impaired myocardial contractility, and in the diastolic dysfunction, there will be impaired ventricular filling. So heart failure can be seen as a syndrome rather than a disease, a clinical pathological syndrome. Always look for an underlying cause, and this clinical pathological syndrome will always lead to either systolic or dystolic or both. In most of the cases, see, it will not come as a separate systolic dysfunction entity or diastolic dysfunction entity. Most of the cases of systolic dysfunction might also be associated with the diastolic dysfunction. So ultimately, whatever is the pathological causes, ultimately heart is unable to maintain the cardiac output that it is required to maintain. Now, as I was telling you, heart failure can be due to either systolic dysfunction or diastolic dysfunction, but they should not be seen as a separate entity or separate, like a patient who have a systolic dysfunction might also have a diastolic dysfunction. But overall, most of the cases of heart failure, it has been seen that they have got the systolic dysfunction in which the ejection fraction is ultimately reduced. Now, in this class, before we proceed further to understand the pathophysiological aspects of heart failure, we will understand what actually cardiac output is, what are the factors which actually determines the cardiac output, and we will quickly revise the physiological aspects pertaining to those things, because unless you understand the physiology of the cardiac performance, you will not understand this particular chapter. So as I have told you, in the systolic dysfunction there might be impaired contractility or impaired ejection, and in the diastolic dysfunction there will be impaired filling or impaired relaxation. So systolic dysfunction, in which there is ultimately decreased contractility, mostly can happen due to ischemic heart disease such as myocardial infarction, angina pectoris, yeah, or it might be due to dilated cardiomyopathies, or it might be due to pressure overload due to systemic hypertension, or volume overload due to the high output states or shunts or valvular regurgitation. And the diastolic dysfunction, in which there is restricted ventricular filling, it is mostly due to increased ventricular stiffness. And in what condition increased ventricular stiffness can happen? Yeah, if there is infiltrative myocardial disease such as endomyocardial fibrosis, or sometimes even in myocardial infarction or myocardial ischemia it can happen, or sometimes in pericardial diseases such as pericarditis, this can happen. Now, if I ask you one question, heart failure, we have seen ultimately there is a decreased cardiac output which fails to meet up the metabolic demands of the body or the peripheral tissues. Now, once heart failure develops, what is the physiological consequence of the heart failure? It will manifest like patient can either have a right-sided failure or a left-sided failure or both. Now, as I am telling you, they should not be seen as a separate entity. It is not necessary that patient will only come up as a right-sided failure. So mostly it is both. So if there is a left-sided failure, the blood will accumulate in the left ventricular, and ultimately this accumulated blood will lead to lung congestion. So it will manifest as the patient will mostly have cough, complaining of cough or shortness of breath or breathlessness. And if there is a right-sided failure, the blood will back up in the peripheral tissues, peripheral veins. So mostly patient will come up with symptoms such as edema of the feet or ankles, or there might be a liver congestion also. So this is how the patient will present to you. Now let us start with the basic physiology. Now, till now what we have understood is that in uh, in heart failure, cardiac output is reduced. Okay, so let us quickly revise the physiology of cardiac output, or what are the factors which influences cardiac output. If I ask you what actually cardiac output is, yeah, cardiac output is amount of blood that the ventricle ejects per minute, and cardiac output is depending upon the two factors, stroke volume and heart rate. So cardiac output is equal to heart rate multiplied by stroke volume. So cardiac output, we have seen cardiac output is the amount of blood that the ventricle ejects per minute. Now if I ask you what is actually stroke volume is, yeah, the amount of blood that the heart ejects per heart beat. So in nutshell, we can say that if the heart has to generate enough cardiac output, two things are necessary. Two basic things are necessary. First, the heart rate should be good enough. Okay. And the second, the stroke volume should be good enough. And stroke volume, we have seen stroke volume is the amount of blood that the heart ejects per heart beat. Okay. So we started with the cardiac output. In heart failure, cardiac output was decreased. And now the second step, we have seen on what factors cardiac output depends upon. Cardiac output depends upon heart rate and stroke volume. So for good cardiac output, we need good heart rate and good stroke volume. Now, if I ask you what are the major factors, there might be various factors on which stroke volume depends upon, but what are the major factors on which stroke volume depends upon? Yes, any other thing? Broadly, the first thing that you should remember is the intrinsic health of the heart. Okay, how healthy your heart is Is it suffering from any disease which has led to its reduction in contraction? Then related to this intrinsic health of the heart is contractility of the heart. Okay, so intrinsic health of the heart, contractility of the heart. Then the other two factors are afterload and preload. Okay, so overall cardiac output is depending upon heart rate and stroke volume. Stroke volume is depending upon the intrinsic health of the heart, contractility of the heart, afterload and preload. So overall these are the factors upon which the cardiac output will depend upon. Okay, now we have understood what are the factors on which cardiac output depends upon, and one of the major factors that we have seen is stroke volume. Now stroke volume definition we have seen. Yes, and as I have told you, one of the major factor on which stroke volume depends upon is the intrinsic health of the myocardium. Okay, so what do you mean by intrinsic health of the myocardium? Intrinsic health of the myocardium means that is it a healthy myocardium or is it a diseased myocardium? For example, if a patient has suffered from acute myocardial infarction, now in consequence to acute myocardial infarction, some amount or some part of myocardium may get infarcted, may lose the function that it was required to do. So if myocardium is not healthy because of any particular reason, it will not be able to generate the enough cardiac output that it is required to do so. So in all the diseases which affects the myocardium to an extent that it will affect the pump function or contractility of the heart, it will ultimately lead to decreased cardiac output and ultimately heart failure will develop. Now we have seen that apart from the intrinsic health of the heart, there are some other factors which affects the stroke volume. For example, preload and afterload. Now, what is preload? What is afterload? What is end diastolic volume? What is end systolic volume? Is end diastolic volume is same as that of preload? Yes, yes, it is. See, let us understand during the diastole, the heart is in the relaxed state. The left ventricle is relaxed. Okay. So only thing that it is doing during diastole is that it is getting accumulated with the blood. It is getting filled up with the blood. So whatever amount of blood will be present in the ventricle at the end of diastole will be called as end diastolic volume. Okay. And if you see the definition of preload, preload is the amount of blood which is present in the ventricle cavity at the end of diastole. So preload can be seen as an amount of blood on which the ventricle has to work. Ventricle has to pump this blood. Okay, so the amount of blood that is in the ventricle at the end of diastole is in diastolic volume. So we can also say that in diastolic volume is equal to preload. In diastolic volume is nothing but preload, and on this in diastolic volume the ventricle has to work and ventricle has to pump out this blood. So as I told you, preload is nothing but in diastolic volumes. So all the factors which increases in diastolic volume will ultimately increase the preload. So what are the factors which can increase preload? If you increase the venous return, preload will increase, or if you increase the duration of diastole, the preload will increase because the ventricular filling time will be increased. Now we will understand heart failure. Heart failure is nothing but the pathophysiology of heart failure is a vicious circle in which one event leads to another event, and this cycle goes on and on. So I was telling you about the end-diastolic volume. So on this end-diastolic volume, the systolic power of the ventricle has to work and has to pump this some amount of this end-diastolic volume. So not necessarily all the end-diastolic volume should be pumped out, but some amount of end-diastolic volume should be pumped out to meet the requirement of the body. So the fraction of the end-diastolic volume that is pushed out of the ventricle is known as ejection fraction. Okay, so out of end-diastolic volume, some amount of blood has been pushed out, and we are calling that amount as yeah. So once the blood has been pumped out of that EDV, some amount will be remaining after contraction. The amount that is remaining at the end of systole, we call it as end systolic volume. So end systolic volume is the amount of blood remaining in the ventricle after contraction. Okay, now you can correlate three things: EDV, ESV, and SV. Can we correlate SV with EDV and ESV? How we can say, what is the formula for SV in terms of EDV and ESV? EDV is in the diastolic volume and ESV is, yeah, stroke volume is nothing but the difference between the end diastolic volume and the end systolic volume. So end diastolic volume, I have told you, is the volume of blood that fills a ventricle during diastole. Normally end diastolic volume is in approximately 120 ml. Okay, so I am telling you the approximate range. And the end systolic volume is the volume of blood remaining in the ventricle after systole. It is normally, yeah, normally take it as, say for example, 50 ml we are taking. So stroke volume is EDV minus ESV. So stroke volume will be 120 minus 50 ml will be approximately 70 ml. And ejection fraction, I have already told you, ejection fraction is the percentage of end-diastolic volume that is pumped by the ventricle. And it is an important clinical parameter in context of heart failure, because mostly in a patient with heart failure with systolic dysfunction, this ejection fraction is reduced. It is less than mostly 40% in the patients with heart failure who have got systolic dysfunction. So we have already seen that EDV is actually equal to preload, and EDV is usually affected by the venous return, that is volume of blood returning to the heart, and EDV is equal to preload, and one law or one mechanism that you might have read in the first year, Frank-Stirling mechanism or Frank-Stirling law. How this EDV is correlated with the stroke volume can be explained by the Frank-Stirling law. And why it is important for you to understand this Frank-Stirling law in context of heart failure, we will understand just after few minutes. And then ESV, that is end systolic volume, it is affected by the contractility of the heart and the afterload. So afterload is actually the resistance against which the heart has to pump the blood. Okay, and preload is actually the amount the ventricle are stretched by the blood. Now let us understand the relationship between end diastolic volume and stroke volume. I have told you about Frank-Stirling law, and Frank-Stirling law actually describes the relationship between end diastolic volume and stroke volume. So the basic rule for the heart is, heart actually tries to pump whatever amount of blood that it receives. Say for example, in a diseased heart which is not able to pump up the adequate amount of blood, in which cardiac output is decreased, now initially there was certain amount of EDV, and out of that certain amount of blood was pumped out. Now in a healthy heart, in a healthy heart, the blood will not accumulate. Whatever amount was needed to be pumped out, it is getting pumped out. But in a diseased heart, some backup will remain. Some amount which was not being able to pump out will remain in the heart. But what I am telling you, heart has a tendency to pump out whatever blood that it receives. Okay, so whatever backlog or whatever backup that is accumulating in the heart will try to pump it out. Okay, so this ability of the heart is actually described by the Frank-Stirling mechanism. And Frank-Stirling mechanism is ability of the heart to change its force of contraction in response to change in venous return. In other words, if there is an increase in end diastolic volume, heart will try to increase the stroke volume also. So if there is an increase in end diastolic volume, heart will also try to increase the stroke volume. So as I have told you, the Frank-Stirling law actually says that heart will pump what it receives. And if you can see this particular graph, which actually demonstrates the relationship between end diastolic volume and stroke volume, as the end diastolic volume is increasing, a healthy heart, what it will try to do, it will try to increase the stroke volume, but there is only up to a limit that it can do so. Beyond that limit, it cannot do so. So to a point wherein the heart is increasing the end diastolic volume, in consequence to end diastolic volume, it is maintaining the stroke volume. It is actually trying to compensate for whatever deficit that the heart has got due to the heart failure. Okay, but after a certain point, it will not be able to maintain that particular stroke volume. And what we have seen, stroke volume is one of the major factor on which cardiac output is depending upon. So till that point wherein it is compensating for that deficit or that damage of the heart, we will call it as compensated heart failure. But after a point wherein it is not able to maintain that stroke volume in consequence to the increase in end-diastolic volume, we will call that heart has gone into decompensated heart failure. So Frank-Starling mechanism, I have already told you, is the ability of the heart to change its force of contraction in response to change in venous return. So what we have seen is that as there is an increase in end-diastolic volume, and end-diastolic volume is nothing but the preload. So if there is an increase in preload, there will be an increase in stroke volume, because heart will try to pump it out by increasing the force of contraction. And this increased force of contraction is because of increased myocardial sarcomere length, which increases the cross bridges between the thick and thin myofilaments, which ultimately increases the force of contraction. But as I was telling you, this increased preload or increased EDV leading to increased force of contraction is only applicable up to a point. After that particular point or that particular limit, increase in the length of muscle fiber will actually lead to hypertrophy of the muscle. And ultimately, if you further increase the length of muscle, it will ultimately reduce the force of contraction. So, if you can see in this particular graph, normally with certain amount of increase in end-diastolic volume, stroke volume is getting increased up to a point wherein a maximum capacity has been reached to produce the stroke volume. And after that point, even if you increase the end-diastolic volume, it will have a detrimental effect. It will increase the pulmonary capillary pressure and ultimately will lead to pulmonary congestion without increasing any stroke volume or cardiac output. Now, as I was telling you, till now we have understood certain physiological parameter. Now we will slightly move towards the pathophysiological things. As I was telling you, pathophysiology of heart failure is a vicious cycle or a vicious circle, wherein one thing leads to another. Now, say for example, patient has suffered from heart failure, and heart failure, as I have told you, is a pathological syndrome, and there is one underlying cause behind it. So whatever is the cause, heart failure has actually led to decreased cardiac output. Now, in consequence to this decreased cardiac output, what actually body will do? Body will try to invoke certain compensatory mechanism to maintain the cardiac output. And mostly the compensatory mechanism, we call it as a neurohormonal activation. It can be in the form of sympathetic stimulation. It can be in the form of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system activation. Now, in consequence to this sympathetic stimulation and renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system activation, what will happen? It will increase both preload as well as afterload. This renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system will lead to both vasoconstriction as well as both sodium and water retention. and also this sympathetic stimulation because of both beta and the alpha receptor stimulation will ultimately lead to both. It will ultimately lead to both preload as well as afterload increase. Now, on a short-term basis or on a acute basis, these compensatory mechanisms, these are good because they give you, they give the body the power to maintain the cardiac output. But if these compensatory mechanism remains activated for a longer period on a chronic basis, then these are detrimental. These can lead to cardiac remodeling that we will understand later on. So what we have seen in heart failure, what actually is happening, there is the intrinsic health of the heart is affected. Yes, it is affected. Intrinsic health of the heart is affected. In consequence to intrinsic health of the heart, there might be decreased contractility of the heart also. Then, in consequence to decreased cardiac output, certain compensatory mechanism is getting activated, and these compensatory mechanism is ultimately increasing the cardiac output and it is increasing the afterload and preload. So these are the pathophysiological consequences of the heart failure that you remember. Now, as I was telling you about vicious cycle, let us understand this vicious cycle uh, with relation to uh, the Frank-Starling mechanism or the Frank-Starling law. As I was telling you, Frank-Starling law of the heart actually describes the property of the cardiac muscle to increase its contractility as the length of the myocardial fiber is increased. Now, say for example, there is a heart failure. Some amount of in-diastolic volume that was supposed to be pumped out, it is not getting pumped out. But normally, heart has a tendency to pump out the blood, whatever blood that it has got, to extent whatever amount that it has to pump, it will try to pump. So to pump that extra blood, there will be a stretch of the myocardial fiber. The myocardial fiber length is increased. Now once this myocardial fiber length is increased, or there is a stretch of this myocardial fiber, again this vicious cycle will get activated. Myocardial fiber is stretched, it will demand that give me more blood because I have a space to accommodate more blood. So what body will try to do? Body will invoke the sympathetic response, and in consequence to this sympathetic response, there will be increased vasoconstriction, and in consequence to these vasoconstriction, there will be decreased venous blood storage or pooling of the blood. So ultimately, it will further increase the in-diastolic volume. Now, see, already heart is diseased. Heart is not able to pump out the normal amount of in-diastolic volume, but in consequence to the cycle that has been invoked, it has started getting more amount of blood. So there will also be redistribution of blood from the viscera to the heart, and there will be fluid or sodium retention due to renin-angiotensin aldosterone activation. And this activation of the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system will increase the volume of the blood because of sodium and water retention. And this increased sodium and water retention will ultimately cause edema. Okay, so this is the vicious cycle that has invoked. So you can easily understand now the pathophysiology of heart failure. Pathophysiology of heart failure, from where it started from one particular disease that the heart has suffered from. Okay, it can be a long-term hypertension, it can be acute myocardial infarction, it can be a cardiomyopathy. So in consequence of heart suffering from that particular disease, the body has invoked certain compensatory mechanism to compensate for the decreased cardiac output. Now, the compensatory mechanism or the neurohormonal mechanism that is activated, that is advantageous on a short-term basis, but on a long-term basis it has got certain disadvantages. And because if this compensatory mechanism remain activated for a chronic duration, it will ultimately lead to cardiac remodeling, and that remodeled heart will not be able to pump the adequate amount of blood again. So the initial purpose of invoking this compensatory mechanisms was to maintain the cardiac output. But on a long term, what we have seen, it has led to certain consequences wherein heart is not able to pump out the blood. So the index event can be seen as any disease that lead to loss of functioning of the cardiac myocyte. It can be acute onset of any disease or any heart disease such as myocardial infarction, or it can be the chronic volume or chronic pressure overload. Then this index event has led to invocation of certain compensatory mechanism, and the two basic compensatory mechanisms that gets invoked, I have told you, are the increased sympathetic activity and increased renin angiotensin aldosterone activity. So this increased sympathetic activation, it actually, through the stimulation of the beta receptors and alpha receptors, it tries to increase the cardiac output. In consequence to the activation of beta receptors, it leads to increase in rate and force of contraction of the heart, and also in consequence to activation of alpha adrenergic receptor, there is increase in venous return. So in the initial phases, if you see this increased rate and force of contraction in consequence to the beta receptor stimulation and this increased preload because of this alpha receptor stimulation, is actually trying to maintain the cardiac output. But one more thing that is happening, that this sympathetic stimulation is also leading to vasoconstriction. So vasoconstriction of the arteries will also increase the afterload. So this increased afterload will ultimately lead to fall in ejection fraction, and ultimately the cardiac output will decrease. Now, what this activated renin angiotensin aldosterone system is doing, in consequence to the decreased renal perfusion, the kidney releases renin, and there is conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. And as you all must be knowing, angiotensin 2 is a very potent vasoconstrictor. So because angiotensin 2 being a vasoconstrictor, it will increase the peripheral vascular resistance, so it will increase the afterload. And also, in consequence to this renin angiotensin aldosterone system activation, there will be release of aldosterone, and this release of aldosterone will lead to sodium and water retention. So this sodium and water retention will lead to increased preload. So as I was telling you, these compensatory mechanisms on a acute basis or on a acute setup or in an acute setting, it is beneficial because ultimately these effects is actually increasing the contraction of the heart, increasing the blood volume and increasing the preload, and ultimately trying to maintain the cardiac output. But if these compensatory mechanism, if it gets remain activated for a very longer period, then the increased afterload and this increased blood volume and vasoconstriction, it will ultimately lead to decreased cardiac function, and also it will lead to cardiac remodeling. So as you can see in this particular flow chart, the thing that is happening here, initially there is an increased preload, increased afterload in consequence to the sympathetic discharge because of vasoconstriction. There is increased force of contraction also. So all these things, apart from the increased renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system activation, all these things is usually trying to maintain the cardiac output on the initial phases. But on the long-term phases, if they remain activated, they will ultimately lead to cardiac remodeling because of the chronic preload and chronic afterload. Chronic salt and water retention will lead to chronic preload, and chronic vasoconstriction will lead to chronic afterload. So this chronic preload and chronic afterload is what we should be very aware of, and because these can actually lead to remodeling of the heart. So as I was telling you, the pathophysiology of heart failure is a vicious cycle, and we need to break this vicious cycle somewhere. And this vicious cycle started in consequence to decreased cardiac output, leading to invocation of compensatory mechanism in form of sympathetic discharge and in form of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system activation. And this is leading to a vicious cycle. So we need to break this cycle somewhere. Either you can target this increased sympathetic stimulation, or you can target this renin-angiotensin aldosterone system activation, or you can try to uh, normalize the cardiac output so that this vicious uh, uh, cycle breaks at a first step itself. Okay. Now, before I move any further, what do you mean by cardiac remodeling? In cardiac remodeling, the connective tissue of the heart, as well as the myocardial cells, they undergo proliferation under the influence of angiotensin 2, and there is myocardial hypertrophy. And this myocardial hypertrophy actually leads to changes in the shape of the heart. So from normal shape, the shape of the heart becomes spherical because of myocardial hypertrophy. So the geometry of the heart shape becomes less elliptical and it becomes more spherical. And this spherical heart is not able to pump up the blood efficiently. Now let us understand, just in the last part of or last segment of this class, one interesting similarity or one interesting analogy we usually uh, discuss while discussing the pathophysiological aspects of heart failure. We call it as the donkey analogy. wherein we compare our heart with the donkey. Okay, donkey is very hard working. Yes, donkey is very hard working, and he tries to do his work very sincerely. Whatever amount of work that you give him, he try to accomplish that work. Whatever load that you will put in the donkey, he will try to deliver that load to its destination very sincerely. Now, if you compare your heart with the donkey, and the load that has been given to the donkey as a preload, okay? So donkey is a heart, okay? The load that has been given to the donkey is preload, okay? And the slope, say for example, if you are living uh, in a place wherein you have a very steep roads, or in a place like in a hilly states, or in a hilly region, the roads are very steep, okay? So you can compare that slope as an afterload, okay? The more steep the slope is, the more high the afterload will be, okay? So till now we have seen three factors. We have seen donkey as a heart, we have seen load as a preload, and the slope of the road as a afterload. And one more thing we can add into this, we can say for example donkey has been given 1 hour to deliver that load to a destination, okay? Now I instruct that, or the master instruct the donkey to deliver the same load, or to in a same time period he has to deliver 2 or 3 loads, okay? So he has to do more trips. So the trip that the donkey has to accomplish, we can compare it as heart rate, okay? Now, so we have 4 factors. We have donkey, we have the load that it has to carry, we have afterload, and we have also the trip that it has to accomplish, okay? Now let us start with the health of the donkey, okay? If donkey is very healthy, the donkey will easily deliver all the load that you have given to the donkey. But if donkey is not healthy, the donkey will not be able to deliver the load that has been given to the donkey. So we can compare the health of the donkey with the intrinsic health of the heart, okay? If heart is not healthy, heart will not be able to do its normal routine duty, okay? Similarly, if donkey is not healthy, it will not be able to do its normal duty. And also in this context you can also add up one factor, contractility of the heart. If heart is not intrinsically healthy, uh, it will not contract in a normal manner, so leading to reduction in intrinsic contractility. So in heart failure, what we are seeing that there is the intrinsic health of the heart is affected, there is reduced contractility, okay? And as I had told you that uh, CHF is a syndrome, pathological syndrome, always look for underlying cause. And if a patient of heart failure comes to you, you have to treat for the symptoms of the heart failure, but also look for the cause that has led to manifestations of heart failure, Okay, and you have to treat that cause also. Then the second factor that I had told you is the load that the donkey has to carry, and we have compared that load to preload. Say for example, on a cart, donkey has to deliver 4 or 5 or 3 sandbags. Okay, now all of a sudden donkey has been instructed to deliver 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 sandbags. So he is used to deliver 3 sandbags, and you have told him to deliver 30 sandbags. Okay, so this is what is happening in heart failure. In heart failure, preload is increased, preload has increased. And if donkey is healthy, he will, to extent he can deliver. But here what we have seen, donkey is not healthy, heart is not healthy, and you are telling heart to do the work or increase the work many folds. Okay, so we have seen preload as a volume of blood or the amount of fiber stretch in the ventricle at the end of diastole. The third factor is the afterload. Okay, and afterload, in this analogy we have compared afterload with the slope of the road. The more steeper the road is, the more hard it will become for a donkey to carry the load. So what is happening in the heart failure? In heart failure, afterload is increased. Similarly, in this analogy, the slope of the road has become very steep. Okay, so it will become very difficult for donkey to deliver the load. We have seen afterload as the resistance against which the heart must pump the blood. So in heart failure, the afterload is increased. Then heart rate. Heart rate, I had told you the number of trips that a donkey has to do in a similar or in a same amount of time that it was doing. So say for example, he was doing 1 trip in that particular span of time. Now you have told him to do 2 or 3 trips in that particular span of time. So in heart failure, actually cardiac output decreases. In consequence to cardiac output, there is sympathetic stimulation, there is beta adrenergic stimulation. So normally heart rate increases in heart failure. And see, in heart failure, heart rate has increased, and this increased heart rate ultimately it will further shorten the diastole. Okay, that will be detrimental. This class will continue in the next class, wherein we will discuss in detail about pharmacotherapy of heart failure. But I will just briefly tell you the overview of the treatment of treatment of heart failure. What are the drugs that are used? Now, if I tell you to summarize the pathophysiology of heart failure that we have discussed till now, what is the basic pathophysiology of heart failure, and what are the consequences of that pathophysiology? Decrease in the cardiac output. Yes. Then in consequence to that decrease in the cardiac output, certain compensatory mechanism has got activated. That, for example, sympathetic activation is there, and renin angiotensin aldosterone system activation is there. In consequence to that neurohormonal activation, there is ultimately there is increased preload and increased afterload. So either what you can do, you can increase the force of contraction and you can directly increase the cardiac output. Now, this therapeutic modality can be very beneficial in acute setting or acute heart failure. Okay. So, to increase the force of contraction, you can utilize cardiac glycosides that we will discuss in the next class, or you can utilize beta adrenergic agonists such as dopamine and dobutamine. Then, as I was telling you, this pathophysiology of cardiac failure or heart failure is a vicious cycle, and you need to break that vicious cycle, and you can break that vicious cycle by targeting either the increased sympathetic activation or the increased renin-angiotensin aldosterone activation. So you can decrease the sympathetic activation by utilizing drugs such as beta blockers. You can decrease the renin-angiotensin aldosterone activation by using AC inhibitors or ARBs or aldosterone receptor antagonist. Now, in consequence to this neurohormonal activation, there is increased preload and increased afterload. So you can use the drug which either decreases the preload or afterload or both. Okay, so there are certain categories of drug which decreases preload, such as vasodilators, such as nitrates or diuretics, or you can decrease a certain category of drug which decreases afterload, or you can decrease both category of drug which decreases afterload and preload. AC inhibitors is one classical example of drug which decreases both preload and afterload. Then, in consequence to this renin-angiotensin aldosterone system activation, there is also sodium and water retention is there. So, for decreasing that sodium and water retention, you can use diuretics. You can use aldosterone antagonist. Okay. Now, heart failure is a progressive disease. Some categories of drug will only provide you symptomatic relief. For example, drugs such as cardiac glycosides, they will only provide symptomatic relief. But there are certain categories of drug which can halt the progression of the disease if given at a proper time. For example, ACE inhibitors. Okay. In the next class, we will discuss about the pharmacotherapy of heart failure in detail. So, I will conclude this class here only. Thank you.